grading the press and journalism schools in areas that matter. My guests include David Carr. Now, I will tell you, I do have something official to say in the program about him, but I also want to say how I'm using some of his work in my own classroom. David Carr, media equation columnist of the New York Times, and more importantly today, that he is the inaugural Andrew R. Lack Professor of Journalism and the Business of Media at Boston University. So while he will continue at the New York Times, he also has joined our ranks because now he's a professor. Lorraine Branham, I know I was going to say about David in using him. How many of you have seen the front page documentary film on the New York Times? See almost everybody. So, you don't even have to read this because you know that from the documentary. I do use it in my class, and I find that my students are always amazed at how interesting it is, and a lot of that has to do, of course, with David, who they could have written a script for you because he's quite a character in that.
Brian.
I play a homeless guy in that movie. I just wander around and bump into things.
So I also want to introduce Lorraine Branham, Dean Lorraine Branham. She's the dean at Syracuse University. I have known Lorraine for a while because she was also the director of the School of Journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. But before she came over to the dark side, or maybe the light side, the academic side, that she was an executive editor at the Tallahassee Democrat in Florida. So, and she has a long, distinguished career, as a journalist. But, now she's on our side too. Thomas Kent, who is the deputy managing editor of the Associated Press, is also here. That it's amazing. Everybody here has a connection to the university. Tom, I discovered when he invited me to be a part of an ONA project as far as their ethics, build your own ethics project. He contacted me because I was president of AEJMC, and I did go to ONA. And while we were talking about a lot of different things, mostly ethics, then he said, "Oh yeah, and I'm an adjunct professor at Columbia University." And it was like, wow. So all of our guests certainly have experience on both sides and will be able to grade the press and journalism education in ways that matter. Now, this is the way I want to begin before I even give my question. So I have 3 sheets here. I think I have 3. I'm going to ask them to take one of the 3 sheets. And if you've ever conducted a focus group, you know what I'm getting ready to do. I'm going to ask them if they would, the first grade, because they're giving a grade that they're committing to. So you can just put your grade down and turn your paper over. We'll see if they follow directions the same way our students follow directions. So then I'm going to ask them if they would give a grade to the press and its performance. And I know they're going to be like, okay, there's so much variety, so I say in general, let's see a grade. If you can give a grade, we only know A, B, C, D, F on the academic side. So if you can give a grade to the press, yes?
It has to be one of those, can't be incomplete.
And can we use minuses?
Okay, minuses, pluses, you're good. Okay, so you're good? So that's the press's performance. They've given a grade to the press's performance. And so
which
now,
press?
Yeah. However you define it. Maybe we'll learn how you define it. Okay? And so here's the second grade I'd like for you to give under there. So let's give a grade to the performance of journalism education. So 2 grades. And you can just turn it over. Okay, good. So I think a good way to get started is let's hear what the grades are. And maybe what you can do is keep us in suspense. And if you want to fold it back so we only see your press grade first, that would be good. But I do want you to reveal it or to tell us in some way. So it's just the press grade first. Okay, let's start with you, Tom.
I give it B minus.
B minus, okay? And Lorraine?
I'm probably guilty of grade inflation. I gave them a B plus.
Thank you.
And David?
I did a D plus.
B plus, okay. So,
He's a press critic.
sometimes what we try to do is to start with the best grades and then work our way down, even though I know you can't wait to find out why the press got such a low grade. But Tom, why don't you talk?
Well, the highest grade, you
Yeah, because I gave him a B plus, right?
she's really the highest
Oh,
grade.
you're the highest,
Yeah.
okay. And do we have people in the back, and we don't have microphones, which I just learned that we never have microphones in the smaller, low-ceiling rooms, so just make sure you project, and we're also doing a video of it. So, Lorraine, just tell us the reason you gave the press the grade you gave.
The B plus,
The B plus,
as opposed
B
to
plus.
the B minus that Tom gave them.
Yes.
Probably some of that is for the effort, the ongoing efforts that I see the press making in trying to deal with the changes that are taking place in the environment in which they have to operate, the many difficulties that they have to grapple with, both in terms of dealing with a changing marketplace, technology, and a business model that it doesn't necessarily support the aspirations and the things that they would always like to do. And I think in many areas, and because we didn't define the press, they're from the very small town newspapers to the New York Times. I think that people there are a lot of good people doing their best to do a good job at keeping the public informed and trying to be good journalists.
Okay. And Tom, you're B minus.
Well, I was also thinking about the huge range of the press, and incidentally, I wanted to say thank you for saying "wow" when you said I'm an adjunct professor. I know that's the lowest form of academic life. My terminal degree is a BA, but I appreciate the kindness. I thought that on the whole, considering the whole range of the press, B minus. I appreciate Lorraine's comment about how difficult our work is, and where I work, I'm acutely aware of the physical danger that a lot of our people are in. This is a very, very tough profession to pursue around the world. And I think on the whole we do some excellent work. The minus, the lower point is simply because I think that the press on the whole, which is always very hard to say, but if I must, always can do better with regard to critical thinking. Sometimes we will just approach a situation, we'll see something is wrong, and we'll say, well, there ought to be regulation. That would solve the problem. When, in fact, sometimes something is a matter of personal responsibility or corporate responsibility. People will see 3 airplane crashes in a row and say, aha, we need to look at what's going on with aviation. When statistically things happen in clumps, as you can see if you flip a coin 100 times in your room tonight. Sometimes we just need to have an additional layer of really incorporated into our thinking.
And David, your
The consumer is very well served right now by the menu of excellent, deep, wonderful reporting by my colleagues, by his colleagues, we've seen in the Ukraine and Gaza that new entrants like BuzzFeed and Vice are doing important work that others of us are following. I'm more talking about the fact that we've been shoved up against the wall. If you look at the past week, we store so much of our capacity, our news gathering capacity, in newspapers, and you see America's largest newspaper companies, Gannett, Scripps Howard, Tribune Co., just in the last week, using and discarding their newspapers like an old paper plate, pushing them off, oftentimes with a great deal of debt, and in a way that suggests there isn't really a way forward. And my disappointment with that, the fact that I am a hard grader when it comes to that stuff, is there was a time when our industry had so much money we didn't know where to put it. That's where investigative reporting came from. These companies that are now transforming themselves into now television-based enterprises, it's all newspaper profits that bought those. The threat, the existential threat that the web represented in terms of news gathering was manifest in 1995, at the very least, to almost everyone. We responded as an industry by saying our work is worth absolutely nothing. We're not going to charge anybody for it. The laws of economics have changed. Everything is going to be free. And we forgot that content doesn't want to be free. It wants to be paid for. It wants to be supported. Excellence doesn't come from anywhere. And our ability to go after eyeballs again and again until now the CPMs, the cost per thousand that people pay, make it an unsupportable proposition in terms of ad-supported media. So now we're turning toward consumers at precisely the moment we've denuded our papers of values. It's like burning the furniture to stay warm and then inviting somebody in and saying, do you want to buy this house now? So I have strong feelings about it, obviously.
So let's kind of segue over to your grade for journalism education, and then since we're at the end of the table with you, David, what was your grade?
I give it a C because I don't know any better. I'm new here. I've never taught a full semester class. I've done a lot of guest teaching, and as you know, that's a great thing. You come in, you light a sparkler, you get everybody excited, and then the teacher has to deal with whatever you left behind. So I haven't lived through the crucible of a semester and taken the custody of young lives. And in that sense, but what I can tell you as a visitor to your planet, not as somebody, you called me a professor, bless you. We'll see about that. I feel like Tom does. It took me 7 years to get my BA, so I'm a little intimidated, but the bandwidth of approaches in journalism schools, and I've been all over the country. I mean, I had the privilege of giving the commencement at Berkeley Grad School, which Ed runs, and those kids were freaks in terms of how smart they were, how ready they were, how much they knew. I also, CUNY has a journalism grad school right down the street from us. Those guys are, like you're doing at Syracuse, they're building their own world. They're building their own, again and again, are using their own skills to construct a news future. And I've seen many faculty who are more than aware of the existential threat that kids face. And then I've seen other people, when I go to their class, what they want to talk about is how great things were back in the day. Nobody cares about that. It wasn't that great. It's a lie. And let's just be honest about it. Journalism now is better than it used to be. And the people who are telling their students over and over, you should have been here last week. What kind of thing is that to say to people? I think we got to work on giving them tool belts, turning them into a kind of Swiss Army knife that can hack their way into a bright, good future of journalism. And I don't know how that's going to turn out.
Okay, and so we have your grade and your vision, and so Dean Branham, what grade did you give journalism education? I'm very curious to know, knowing that you are a dean of College of Communications.
I gave it a B.
Okay, because
And I gave it a B. And again, we've got the range of programs, and David alluded to this. I mean, we have, some programs that are really on the cutting edge and moving forward, and others that are still trying to find the way. And some of it is similar to what's happening in the newspaper industry, because not all schools are as well funded. Not all schools can afford to make some of the changes that need to be made. when I left the profession to become a journalism educator, I was really concerned about helping to train the next generation of journalists and thinking a lot about what skills were they going to be able to, what they were going to need in this brave new world that was changing every day, and trying to figure out, how to prepare students for this new and rapidly changing news environment. And I think in some places there are a lot of really talented and innovative people who understand the need for students to be entrepreneurial, who are, introducing innovation into their classes, who have made the transition to digital. And then there are other places, far too many other places, I think, in journalism education that are still woefully behind and trying to catch up. And these kids want to be journalists too. And so I think we need to do a better job of having a level playing field in journalism education, of looking at our curriculum and making sure that everybody is getting the skills that they need, the new skills, not the old skills, and that we're also training our faculty. I mean, a big piece of this is that the faculty need updated skills as well.
And Tom, your grade?
I gave a C, which is really presumptuous of me since I don't spend that much time in journalism schools. But I did it for this reason. I picked the absolute middle grade, and the reason was because I think a lot of journalism schools, especially based on what I've learned here in the past few days, are doing an excellent job, and yet, in many cases, journalism school is just not essential. There are a lot of people in the profession who did not come through journalism school. Like it or not, good or bad, it's just the fact. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm a Russian studies major myself. And so I jotted down a couple things that I thought the journalism schools could do to make themselves more essential. One of them is the importance of being able to turn out a crisp, clean, fast 300 words. I know a lot of journalism students are there to save the world and so forth, but if they can't turn out a fast, clean, crisp 300 words with punctuation, then there's a problem there. I would love journalism schools to focus a little bit more on purpose and why we're doing this, and why is there journalism, and why is it important. I see a lot of excellent work being done at the level of AEJMC, the sessions I've been at on these questions, but I'm not sure it percolates down to critical thought within journalism school. I'm a little conflicted about the question of tools, learning programs to video programs, audio programs. I'm still traumatized by learning HTML once because I thought it was important, and then it turns out it isn't. So are we teaching skills today that will be outdated very quickly? And a lot of professors have been saying to me, well, I've got students, they know 10 times more about video than we do. Well, perhaps that's God saying that you should leave it to your bright students to learn these things on their own, and this doesn't have to be taught in class. The last couple things I'll mention is just that it's wonderful that a number of journalism schools are really broadening the access for their students to other parts of the university. So they are getting, in Tom Patterson's words, more knowledge to work with. So instead of people coming out as vanilla journalists, there's that fudge ripple of science specialty or religion expertise. And the last thing I'd say is that this week I've heard a number of war stories told to me by professors. And they all go sort of like, I've got this really great student, and she went to Ukraine to find out who really shot down that plane, and she almost got killed, but, or, I've got two students who went into the most horrible neighborhood undercover and lived with the gangs, and they almost got killed. I'm as one who works with people who almost get killed a lot, I fail to see the romance in it. And I think that sometimes we tend to glorify putting people in danger. It's all, about the dust jacket on the book we'll write someday. And we need to think about the fact that, even people who've been doing this for a long time get killed sometimes. And, is there a little in your language, human experimentation going on by sometimes putting students into situations they should really not be in.
So when Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward came to the UT Austin campus to have an intimate conversation with the journalism faculty and students, that Carl said, in an answer to the question, what is news? His response was, news is what I say it is. And so kind of starting on this end and going back to the other end, let me just ask you, what is news? Because news sometimes appears to be what I say it is. So what do you say it is? Or what do you think it is? What's your view?
Well, I think it's two things. I think it's, first of all, what's out of the ordinary, which is the plane crash and so forth. And the second thing it is seeing trends that can take us somewhere. They may be good trends, they may be bad trends. I don't think we should shy away from good news. Some journalists feel that to identify something as good is kind of a sellout. Everything has to be an expose of something bad. But I think news can be something that points us in a useful direction as well.
Lorraine?
I think news is a couple things. I think trends are important. I remember when I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer and Gene Roberts, my old editor, who was a wonderful mentor, decided we were going to have a trends reporter, and everybody was appalled by this. And, he said, we need to try to figure out how we can get to what he called the news that oozes. It's not breaking, it's not happening now, but and maybe not tomorrow, but you can see off little pieces around that are ultimately going to shape up to something. And I think we don't necessarily do a good job of that, and it's important that we're constantly kind of looking out on the landscape and trying to pull together those things, that news that oozes, that ultimately reporters can put together and give some context and perspective and help people see what's down the horizon. I think news is also things that are important for people to know. And I think that is the primary job for journalists is, figuring out what do people need to know and how can we best share this information with them. And as a very old-fashioned journalism, I still care deeply about the watchdog function of the press and making sure that we are paying attention to those things that our government and our representatives are doing so that we can inform the public and they can make good decisions about whether or not that behavior, those things that are happening are acceptable, and if people are operating as the people in a democratic society want them to operate. So I feel very strongly about the need to continue to be watchdogs, and I worry that sometimes that piece of it gets lost because there's another part of news that people care about and want, and that's the desire for people to be entertained, and for us to find, that news that is entertaining for people and that people do want to have. But for me, that's a very small part of what our jobs ought to be doing.
David?
Like these guys, I believe that news is fundamentally something that is unexpected and it catches you, right? It catches you when you say, hey, I didn't know that. My concern in the contemporary environment is that we're forgetting that news is usually something that happens somewhere else. We have people locked in cubes, typing their brains out. And as Gay Talese said when I was on a panel with him, we're outside people. We're supposed to leave, find people more interesting than us, come back and tell their stories. And I think that a lot of times right now what we're doing is sitting in our cube, bathed in the data stream, putting a little chocolate sauce on top of it and sending it back out. That might be clickable. That might, but it isn't news. I reject categorically the suggestion that news is a creature of the algorithm and that machines and robots can decide. I care what's trending on Twitter. It doesn't mean that it's news. And Gannett's move this week toward we're going to start managing by what's trending with the readers. I think all is lost. I do think that Carl is right. News is what I say it is. When I got to the New York Times, I would watch them select the 6 or 7 most important stories in the Western Hemisphere, according to them, right? Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, up on the screen, the web is just pivoting, and I thought, this is a riot that they're doing. This is so dumb. I've come to believe that it's very important that somebody is creating hierarchy, creating order, that the visual cues from our great photojournalists, from our great designers, that tell you, I know what happened, but I never know why. And I think on a daily basis, we're looking a lot toward our newspapers, toward our websites, to create a hierarchy of information, to make what, should I be more worried that we're going to war or that Ebola is on the leash? It's like these days our readers don't know where to look. They just don't know where to look. And I think if we can take the fire hose and put it in either a hierarchy that fits on your phone or fits on your tablet or fits, heaven forbid, on a piece of paper that we roll up and throw in their yards, that we're doing a great and true service, not just by curation, but by the active act of going out and getting information.
So do you think most news organizations are doing a good job of creating that hierarchy, saying what's important and what's less important? Because
the day after Gannett announced that they were going to start taking their cues from readers, front page column left in the Tennessean was Kroger grocery store is going to lower prices. I don't think so. I don't think that's really like news. It just happens to be about one of their advertisers. I think in general, I don't think we should get pushed around by. If we paid attention to what people wanted, we'd have a Justin Bieber feature on our front every single day. I think that the broad mix that consumers are assembling, either through feeds like Twitter or through RSS or whatever they're doing, people are organizing their informational diet in a way that suits them, and they can be well served by that. We just got to make sure that we're putting great things in the pipe that, to your point, it has to entertain. It has to jump above the clutter. You can't say, I just served up a heap of Brussels sprouts that no one's eating, but it's very nutritious. You have to, whenever I tell my boss, this week I'm writing about newspapers, and I said, well, if I write a column about how people don't care about newspapers, nobody's going to care about that column. And his response, as all good editors, was, you need to make them care about that. So I was up late working on it.
I just want to say something about that, though, because the problem with that hierarchy of news, and as somebody who was often the only woman and the only person of color in those front page news meetings, I could see that the way those stories and the way the paper was being shaped were people who were coming from one point of view and one perspective and not necessarily considering what was going to be of interest to the entire community. So it's one thing to have that hierarchy of news, but you have to make sure that the people in the room are representing multiple perspectives and multiple interests. Otherwise, you end up with a very narrow point of view of the world and a very narrow mix of news. And it's one of the reasons why people often ended up rejecting what we were giving them, because they did not see themselves and their interests reflected in the newspaper or on television.
So, Tom, do you agree, disagree, or in terms of that hierarchy?
Well, I think that we have to preserve some hierarchy. I understand the commercial considerations. Sometimes, it's nice that AP is a not-for-profit. It enables us to stand back a little bit. But we come under pressure a lot from various subscribers who will say, can you get that video of that naked person who came up to a drive-in window and ordered a cheeseburger? The answer is, yeah, we could. We're very good in finding UGC and verifying it. Yeah, we can get all of that. But is it worth our resources? Mm-hmm. And so far, fortunately, most of our subscribers have been willing to take no for an answer from us. We just say our resources don't allow it. Maybe they find it elsewhere, and so be it. Mm-hmm. But I think that if we live by the click, we would be tempted to get into some of this. But and we try to have amusing stories. It's not all a bland diet. But we feel that we've got some bounds that we can stay within.
Yeah, I had said to myself I wasn't going to ask you all this question because it sounds like such a cliche. But this summer in teaching my class, summer term, and this class has mostly journalism students, but they're also is cross-listed with students who are coming from other fields. So they really don't have any idea about journalism, which is nice because it brings that other perspective in there. And so we're going, everything's been going quite well over the 6-week term. And then this non-journalism student says that we're all journalists. So he included himself. So these are not journalists. And, my other students, my journalism students were horrified by this. And, of course, we stopped and had a, conversation about that because it was important for them to hear, for my journalism students to hear what my non-journalism which really represent the majority of the world. Most people are not in journalism. And most of the students on any college campus, they are not journalism students. So it's important for them to hear that perspective. So that brings us back to the cliche question, but important, which we also talked about at ONA down in Atlanta.
Very fair.
Who is a journalist?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. And I think what we have to do really is start breaking down the word journalist and creating subcategories under it. The word journalist is a twin bed sheet which we're trying to stretch now over the entire king-size bed of mass media. And some things are it works in some cases, and sometimes it just rips. I mean, to me, for my kind of journalism, for what we do, I would say that journalism is you're a journalist if you pretty much full-time occupy yourself with gathering and transmitting information and fact-based judgments, and you have a visible, transparent code of ethics. I mean, that is how I would define it. But I fully understand that there are all sorts of people from Glenn Greenwald to the alternative weekly on the street to the individual person on Twitter who consider themselves journalists, who think that they should be entitled to coverage under shield laws, things like that. So we're going to have to come up with subgroups so we know what we're talking about, because I think the word journalist is just too sacred and too important to become so watered down that it doesn't mean anything. I'm not saying that my form of journalism is the only kind that can call itself journalism. Maybe we should call ourselves impartial journalism, or journalism with the goal of being impartial, if you prefer. But I think that this word journalism is going to be the end of us unless we start breaking it down and defining exactly what we mean.
Lorraine, what do you say to that?
I agree with a lot of Tom's thoughts on that. It's something that troubles me greatly, and I did go to journalism school and had a 30-year career as a journalist and met many people who went to journalism school, but also people who did not. But these were people who decided at some point that they wanted to be involved in the business of covering the news, telling people what was going on in their communities, and working for news organizations that had as their objective doing that. Now there are all kinds of news organizations. There are new ones coming up all the time. There are lots of people out there who want to tell stories, who don't necessarily understand what it means to be a journalist, which is constantly changing, who don't necessarily adhere to a code of ethics, which seems to be in flux these days, who don't necessarily understand all of the things that are involved in terms of being transparent, about sourcing, about how. So I think we're going to have to think long and hard, as you say, about how we define journalists, and understand that there are going to be different categories of journalism and different kinds of people who are doing it. There are lots of people out there telling wonderful stories, putting lots of good information out there who are not journalists. The key is helping the public understand and discern the differences, because I think we do, people who are in the business, people who are in the academy, do understand these different forms that people who are out there engaging and telling stories, the different ways that you're able to do that, and the different things that you might call them. But I think the public sees everybody as a journalist, and that's the challenge. We need to be able to separate for people, and in the public minds, that okay, this person is a blogger. This is somebody in the community who goes out and gathers information and puts it out on the website for everybody to see. This is somebody who has opinions about a lot of different things. We haven't done a good job of making it clear to the public, and they put us all under the same umbrella. And the bad part about that is it has given journalists and journalism a bad name. Because there's a lot of bad things out there and bad people out there doing work and calling themselves journalists.
And I'm going to come back to that point you're making because I do have a question about that. But let's not blame the bloggers for the bad name that journalists have.
Oh, I'm not, because there are good bloggers out there.
No, that's
there are
what I mean.
people
I'm
who- yes.
saying this low, how the public feels about journalists. That it's been pretty low. It's been pretty low for a long time. But I'm going to come back and talk about that. I do want to know, David, what you think about this in terms of journalists.
I'm torn because I thought Tom's explanation of what a journalist is was like just nailed it. And I'm going to look at the video and write down what he said and pick his,
Me too.
And use it, yes.
pick his pocket later. On the other, I'm like you guys. I don't want to get into taxonomy. I don't want to get into. Even when we, as you point out, it isn't bloggers, it's bloggers, bloggers. And the thing is if you're going to start developing a subcategory like various niches, one of the ones, I guess, for Glenn Greenwald we use is Pulitzer Prize winner. We'd start with that. It covered the most important story
Absolutely.
of the year. Revealed that this government was more than capable of spying on its citizens without their permission, and pulled back the blankets on the most important story in 5 years. Is he a journalist? I was with him last Monday. There are dogs barking everywhere. He's up in the jungle. The internet doesn't work. And he has been a consistent, persistent advocate of privacy rights, of skepticism around national security. But you know what? People know news when they see it. It's like pornography. They recognize it, and the web is a self-cleaning oven that will move from the great mass of information to more and more secure information and nominate people because of their persistence in social media feeds, because organizations like ours end up following them and end up becoming known as journalists because they commit acts of journalism over and over. I don't care if they went to J school. I don't care if they make their living full-time doing it. The proof is in the pudding. Do they, as Tom said, do fact-based reporting, even if they have an agenda that kicks the can down the road? And I don't.
So how is he labeling himself?
He
He calls himself an independent journalist.
He's happy to be a journalist, but if you then we get into the whole thing of sourcing. When I was at Glenn's, we had a long talk about Julian Assange and how crazy he is to deal with. And I was coming down the mountain afterwards, and my phone rang, and it was, David, this is Julian. And I was like, oh! I haven't talked to him in like a year, and it's like, did you somehow know
That you were just talking about it. Yeah.
I was already worried the NSA was tracking me down the hill. And there's Julian, and Julian absolutely rejects journalism and rejects and says, I'm an advocate who uses the tools of journalism, but again played a very critical role. I think the tougher question down the road would be the dividing line between source, what are sources, because they have a friction-free way to get their information out. They don't need us same way. And what is a journalist? And we were talking last night about with Tom and with Ed about whether protecting ourselves with the shield law is going to be enough at a time when sources can originate their own information.
That's an excellent point, because that's one of the scary things when you talk about who is or isn't a journalist. We are being cut out of that, and we have sources going straight to the public with what they want the public to know, what they want to share with the public, whether it's corporations doing it with their communications and PR departments, or whether or not it's individuals, whether or not it's athletes. I mean, I hear sports reporters complaining about the fact that now, athletes break their own news. They share share information with their publics. They're tweeting and putting things out there before sports writers even have an opportunity to do it. So
it's complicated.
It is complicated.
Celebrity magazines in the last 6 months have gone off a cliff. Why is it? It's because of what you said, is they've developed, like many brands in America, celebrity brands, have developed this direct one-on-one Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter-enabled relationship where the middleman, that's where
us.
we make our money,
Journalists.
is getting squeezed out.
But I want to come back to the point, because that was being raised a little bit earlier, in terms of the public. And if you look at polls, that the public holds the press in pretty low regard. And so I guess, and this has been going on for a long time, so this is not new. So my question to each of you, what would you say are the top 3 reasons the public holds the press in such low regard? And so, Tom, what do you say? Didn't give you a chance to write that
Yeah,
down.
right. Well, I would say, first of all, mistakes. We make mistakes. Even the AP makes mistakes. And those mistakes are bruited around instantly and with great glee by those who are critical of the press. So that undermines credibility. I think it's a sense of political bias in the press. And obviously, somebody's going to see bias in almost everything you do. But if you look around the press landscape, you probably will find, whatever your politics are, somebody you think is purporting to be journalistic when they're really carrying out a political agenda or heavily influenced by a political agenda. And then I think it's our lack of innovation. We could have been all sorts of stuff. We could have been Google. We could have been, once we gave our news away free on the web, we could have decided, okay, well, mobile is the last frontier, so no one's going to put out an app for free. Here's where we can regain the ground we lost with free news on the web. Didn't happen. So I think those are my 3.
Okay. Lorraine?
I don't know if I have 3, but certainly I think the political climate in this country, which leads to the allegations that there's this bias in the press, is part of the problem. I mean, trying to cover, these extremes has led people to believe that we're part of that problem and that we're helping to create that problem. And I think that's very unfortunate. We've not done a good job of really trying to help people see that it is more about what's happening in the political environment and not so much about what's happening in our newsrooms. People think we're part of the problem. So that's a challenge for us. Some of that is fueled by opinion journalism and commentary that has taken over. I think people see that as news, and they see those opinionated people on television making pronouncements and making news. And so the bias that they attribute to the press is partly fueled by the fact that they're seeing what's going on Fox, they're seeing MSNBC, and they're seeing those people who are out there sharing their views with the public. And for them, that's a part of the problem with the press, because news has become too opinionated. I hear people say all the time, it used to be people would just tell us the facts, Now there's just too much opinion. So I think that has really helped really change the public's view of the press as a fair and balanced. And the last thing that I think has become a problem for us, and Tom alluded to that, it is the problem of accuracy and the many mistakes. And I think this is getting worse instead of better now, because people see grammatical mistakes in the paper, and they elevate that to, well, my God, if they can't even spell it right, if they can't even, get those things right, how can I trust them with the real facts? How do I know they got the rest of it right? And this is getting worse instead of better, because people don't really care about copy editing anymore. More and more papers have laid off copy editors. With the web, there's more of a feeling that, if we didn't get it right the first time, we can come back later and fix it because we've got this 24-hour news cycle. But I think that exacerbates the perception among the public that we play fast and loose with the facts, that we don't really care about getting things right, and so they feel they cannot trust us.
I think that, as you point out, this is a long-going, we just keep going down in polls. You know, we ended up, you know, underneath the cable guy, then it's underneath Senate, and then we're underneath Congress, and now we're like lower than a snake's belly. We can't even be measuring. And I think one of the huge problems, and you alluded to this earlier, is we have failed to reflect the America that really is now. Again and again, you see a bunch of crusty old white dudes like me lumbering out into neighborhoods with a safari helmet on, telling me, pathologizing communities, coming up with simple, easy answers about things that have been going on for years and years. And when I took over, I was an editor for a while at Washington City paper, Chocolate City, right?
Yeah.
Black run, black owned, black, all the white peoples. When you come there, and it's just, this isn't going to work on a business level. Let's just never mind whatever moral, ethical, whatever. It's just business-wise, the town isn't going to read you. They just are. And so that was a huge priority for me at Washington City paper. And the thing you always hear about how difficult diversity is, and how, you know what, wasn't that hard. Just wasn't. Is begin to open your eyes, see the excellence that's around. You talked about weeklies as if they were somewhat of a lower species. Well, I worked with Ta-Nehisi Coates. I worked with Kate Boo. I worked with David Platts, Eric Wemple at these weeklies. And part of what made it a success and made the community trust us is sometimes we sent out reporters who had a common background with them. That's number one. Number two, this issue of efficacy, I think, is super, super important. When I wrote a book, Jill, who you heard talk the other night, said to me, it'll be good for you to be covered. You'll see what it's really like. And journalism,
that is so true.
Journalism is an incredibly blunt technology. And somebody, you can hear journalists, I cover journalists, and they're whining and kvetching and say, look, this is what we do to people every day. This is what it feels like. And we miss the nuance, we miss the subtext, or like I did last Monday, I got a very high profile journalist named Ron, so, and just got killed on Twitter right away for it. It didn't make the paper, but I still got the correction. But then somebody else pointed out, you know what, of this 12 dogs, he got one of the dogs' names wrong too. So this being the New York Times, I picked up the correction. The dog's name is Shiva, not Sheila. And the Times' sort of frantic emphasis on efficacy and rectitude, as AP has the same standard, which is they don't make many mistakes, but they freak out when they do. And you know what? I think that builds trust. The other thing is the reason people don't like us is we are a preening, self-regarding bunch that because we're like now we're the ones losing the jobs, and we act like there's like the world is ending, right?
It's
and
not.
every time you talk to somebody, they say, "Well, I worked in auto, I worked in personal computers, welcome to my world, pal. Things change. You're losing your job. Get over it."
So, to jump back over into the classroom, because I know we're going to run out of time, ethics and journalism education. I mean, we know what's happened and what kind of historical context, from Jason Blair to just most recent. We can go back further than that, but most recently what happened at BuzzFeed. But in the classroom, in journalism education, one, do you see that we are even addressing what future journalists need to know in terms of ethics, and what do you think are the top two? And Tom, since you not only the ethics or standards person for AP, but also because you were in charge of that ONA ethics project, which you might kind of describe this briefly, but really tell us, what is it? I mean, what if our students knew nothing else about ethics, what 2 things do they absolutely have to know beyond plagiarism? You don't get to say that. That's also an academic. That's an academic thing too. You're not saying else, period.
Well, this sounds like the question they used to ask Plato. It's tough. What are the 2 things about ethics? But I'll start just by mentioning the ONA project very briefly. This is the ONA, Online News Association, Do-It-Yourself Ethics Code Project, or Open Source Ethics Code Project. And I know that sounds a little scary to some people, sort of like do-it-yourself brain surgery. But let me assure you that the project, which is a Google Doc right now, it's in crowdsourcing, please come onto the site and put your comments on it, is an effort to help individual journalists, startups, bloggers, and so forth, create their own ethics codes. So we start with some fundamentals. Don't plagiarize, tell the truth, correct your mistakes. I think we all would agree you have to accept. But after that, it guides you to a choice between, are you going to be an objective, impartial school journalist, or are you going to be a point of view journalist with transparency? And then we go into about 40 separate things, like here are the policies on, here are various points of view on suicide, here's various points of view on privacy, here's various points of view on photography, the use of filters and things in photography, on which honest journalists can disagree. And we hope that for those journalists who would rather not take a ready-made ethics code, but really want to have some sense of ownership, they can work their way through this. And I have little cards with the crowdsourcing URL, and if anybody would like one afterward, then I'm happy to give it. We'd love to have your comments. You can just put them right there on the Google Doc, no password required.
Number
if you only had two ethical principles, I think one of them would be think of the impact of what you do. Sometimes you should have a major impact of what you do, and sometimes the less said the better, because you can harm someone or harm some cause in a way that's all out of proportion to their real value. So that would be one. The other one is, I don't know if this is quite ethics, but I'll say it anyhow, is, are we missing something? Are we too sure of our point of view? I mean, I personally make a point of reading 2 right-wing and 2 left-wing blogs every morning. And that really helps me in the course of the day when a story comes up. What would Instapundit say about this? Mm-hmm. What would Talking Points Memo say about this? And that can really help to center you.
Right.
2, tell the truth.
Okay, well, you said tell the truth.
Yes.
So beyond tell the truth.
Yes. Beyond tell the truth.
Yes, 2.
I think that is, so you've eliminated 1. And be transparent, because I think it's important for people to know where you got your information. And I think the do no harm is think about, what the impact of what you're writing is going to be. I mean, there are times that we have to do things because it's important to get that information out there, and there's sometimes we put stuff out there just because we can.
Your turn, David.
One of the reasons I was excited to do business with Boston University and Tom Fiedler was, he had run a show. He ran the Gary Hart Story as a reporter. He edited the Miami Herald. And ethics, and I commend what the ONA is doing. I'm going to go take a look at it. Are most important in the crucible of the moment. It's like, what are you going to do in the heat of the moment? And what I tried to tell, I worked with a lot of young reporters, is let's just begin with the mom rule. If you could not explain what you're up to with your mom, we're at the end, honey, that doesn't sound really good, what we're doing. It's helped me out more times than I can think of, where you have to get into so many layers of explanation, and after a while, so that's one thing, the mom rule. The other thing is, and you guys spoke to this with the impacts, is if you're working at the AP, I mean, part of the problem I had coming to New York Times is I was paralyzed by the fact that you could break someone's career in half like a dry winter twig if you did it wrong. And so I found it really, really paralyzing. I think you have to think about how it lands, and to do that, you have to bifurcate professionals. People are dealing in media all the time, and it's like, damn what you say, I'll watch what you do, and I'll tell them what's coming, and if it's going to be a hard story, I'll tell them to put the nut cup on, but most times, it's whatever. Whereas civilians, I do think you have a duty to warn, and to say, and when you're trying to interview them and get some, I know this will be good for me, I'm not certain it'll be good for you. And maybe you ought to talk to your mom or your lawyer or your friend. And because as the editor of a paper, as a writer, it's never been the professional politicians or the businessmen who've called the hammer on me. It's somebody really nice and really normal that'll call me and just say, I can't believe you just did that to me. Why'd you do that? What for? They don't understand.
So what I want to do, actually I got chills by what you said, especially the mom rule there. I want to make sure that you all get some of your questions asked. So this is the kind of changed Meet the Press format, where we get the audience. Maybe we've moved to Oprah, and that's okay. So we can get some of your questions, because I know you have some questions too.